The Middle East is a house designed by Europeans, but sat on the foundations of the Ottoman Empire. Its monarchies, ministries and militaries aped those of Europe, and for several decades that did provide stability. But now the region's in crisis, and it's the chaos caused by a new mutation of political Islam that's the first point in understanding this.
Arab regimes across the region have failed. On economically, politically, on the security front, they have failed to form a regional structure, any form of permanent prosperity or stability. Absent some form of channel where the Arab public can actually get involved in governance, Islamism has been the only gateway.
So are the old ideologies embodied by Ba'athist or military leaderships dead and buried, and will an Islamic caliphate sweep all before it? We don't know yet, but we do know that this new wave of Islamist politics is a threat to elites and states across the region. There's another thing that's become clear too, that trying to drop another Western construct, liberal democracy, into the current cauldron of the Middle East simply isn't going to work. For now, at least, the so-called Arab Spring is going nowhere. In some places, like Iraq, it's being trumped by the politics of identity. Whereas the old authoritarian Ottoman model, rule by the pasha or general, has shown its resilience in Egypt and Algeria. But where the old strongmen are swept away, Gaddafi or Saddam, fragmentation has followed, and that means old borders coming into question too. The most obvious example has been the erasure of the Syria-Iraq border by ISIS, which now proclaims its new Sunni state. The Kurds have got in on the act too, pushing forward their historic quest for statehood. Libya also is in danger of fragmentation, with the east, ancient Cyrenaica, now already largely separate. So are the states contrived by the European colonial powers nearly 100 years ago doomed? Quite possibly. But don't forget that even in Iraq or Libya, there are still leaders who aspire to control of the whole, not just some rump statelet.
You find a tenacious commitment to the state as the unit of primary identity. Now, there are a lot of other identities going on there, religious, ethnic as well, but the state survives, and the state survives as the unit of primary identity across the whole of the region.
And don't forget that other hangover of British rule, Israel. There's been a 100-year argument about its existence and borders, and at times like now, that conflict can inflame the whole region. But new forces are coming into play. New alliances, in fact, emerging in the Middle East. And whereas outsiders are happy to sell weapons to these power brokers, regional players are key.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
So Iran has made itself the guardian of the Shia, forging a power bloc with Hezbollah in Lebanon, President Assad's regime in Syria, and increasingly the rump state of Iraq. Saudi Arabia champions the Sunni Arabs, pouring resources into the Syrian opposition, and its cash has made a client of Egypt too.
The Saudis are not necessarily fighting the Iranians based on religious foundations. In part, this is a traditional conflict between two very important regional powers, rich states, very significant influence, fighting over controlling the Middle East. at a time when the US is disengaging.
But this isn't just a simple binary Saudi-Iranian contest. Saudi Arabia's will has been flouted by Qatar, also Sunni, backing Islamists in Egypt and Gaza. Israel too makes its own rules. Some, dare I mention Tony Blair, say the West must take sides and ally with the Saudi bloc. But the more general Western attitude is to steer well clear. Should we in the West be worried? Yes, and deeply, because there is turmoil in the Middle East and it's likely to stay that way for the foreseeable future. And whether or not we want to get involved, we will be affected.
This is going to come back to bite you. If you think of the huge trouble of turning, of the United States and indeed the international community turning its back on Afghanistan, leading to the birth of Al-Qaeda and a transnational jihadi movement, it took days for a young jihadi tourist to move from Europe to Afghanistan. It takes hours, basically a charter flight to Turkey and across the border to get into Syria. So clearly this problem is going to come back and bite Europe especially hard, but also the United States.
Growing chaos in Libya or Iraq could raise energy prices and hit economic recovery. Refugees from Syria or Libya flee to the EU. Airspace is becoming unsafe over big chunks of the region. And as for the ungoverned space that is also opening up in several countries, it provides a potential home for piracy, extremism, and perhaps even the next 9/11.